First, I want to say Rabi al-Awwal Mubarak to everybody. This is the blessed birth month of our blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. My heart was just smiling, when I heard Sidi Tariq say that there is over 1 million salawat pledged, for this month. And that just makes my heart sing. And so I pray, inshallah, that we continue to be in salawat constantly in this month. This is part of what we do in this month, inshallah, and then all the wonderful announcements that were made. So please continue to join in all the great work. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today, inshallah, we're going to speak a little bit about our mental health as mothers, and by extension as women, and truly by extension as all people, and whoever you may be, in whatever stage of life. I'll kind of hone in a little bit more specifically to women and to mothers, but so much of what I'm going to share is honestly generalizable to all of us, regardless of age, regardless of background, regardless of even geographic location where you're located. I hope, inshallah, what's shared today, you find some level of benefit in. Now, let me tell you something, subhanAllah. For me personally, if you know anything about my journey and my story, I had no intention of going into the mental health field. In fact, I myself had a good bit of stigma towards mental health growing up, not different than my community, than those who raised me, than those all around me. May Allah bless them all and increase them all. But let us be true with one another that there certainly has been a lot of stigma and resistance towards mental health. And it's not just in the Muslim community. Now that I'm in this field, I can tell you it's really everybody and anybody who, doesn't want to have any sort of label on them or feel like I'm, somehow there's something wrong with me. But let me tell you something, subhanAllah. This deen of ours, this religion of ours, is one that continues to push us towards ihsan. Ihsan is a high level of working on yourself so that you, subhanAllah, purify yourself to the best of your ability. And you do things with the best ability possible. This includes our health, which included within that is our mental health. This deen, this religion of ours, this way of life of ours does not neglect anything. It tells us how to live our life in the best way that Allah intended for us, because He created us and He knows what He created. And He knows what's going to protect us from harm and what's going to help us go forward with the best possible measures. And because of that, you find that the scholars of Islam have spent a lot of time talking about health and wellness from every domain and every perspective, and they did not neglect mental health. This is why Islam is different in a tradition compared to other sister faiths of it, that we don't have any sort of issue or stigma, it turns out, related to mental health or otherwise. So much of that stigma is actually cultural, or perhaps it's misunderstandings, or perhaps it's what we call in the field today spiritual bypassing. That's a fancy term. But what it means is that we kind of use spiritual, religious language to say, to explain things about health and wellness. And while that's helpful on one side, and I too speak a language of spirituality, and we need to include that. But if you say everything has to do with your iman or faith, you're losing out on something, and something very important. Sometimes we judge one another. Sometimes we shame one another. Not just women, all people, but certainly I've seen this in women's circles a good bit. I'll give an example that's very specific to mothers. If you're a mother, you've gone through pregnancy. And if you've gone through pregnancy, the statistics in the scientific fields of maternal health and wellness show that 1 in 5 women who have been pregnant are going to develop postpartum depression, which is, or sometimes now they call it peripartum depression, which basically means a depression in and around the time of pregnancy or after pregnancy, after delivery. Now, So many communities, not just the Muslims, so many communities, they put a lot of shame and a lot of stigma on this discussion. And they'll say to the woman who's just delivered, who's starting to have her depressive symptoms, and they'll say to her, shame on you. How dare you? How could you? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just gave you a healthy baby. And here you are, and so many others couldn't potentially have a baby. And here you are depressed. Here you are crying. Here you are complaining. What is this? Don't you have enough iman? Don't you know to pray? Very judgmental and shaming kind of language. And it's hard. And for so many women, they isolate because they feel embarrassed. They themselves are guilt tripping themselves or are feeling very judged, harshly criticized by others. And subhanAllah, so much of this is, unfortunately, I'm going to use a word that's a little bit harsh. In Arabic, we would say jahl is ignorance. Do you know why it's ignorance? Because it doesn't match scientific evidence. Scientific evidence on postpartum or peripartum depression shows that the majority of the time, this is actually something that is biological. It is hormonal. The same hormones that shift and allow you to be able to hold that fetus in the womb for pregnancy shift again at delivery. And in that shifting, sometimes for some women, again, 1 in 5, it's a very rapid shift. And when that happens, the mood and the hormones shift too, sometimes too fast. And that affects the mood. I'm giving you an example today that's very biological. Very, it's something not her fault whatsoever. Now, for some women, yes, there are other causes. It could be environmental. It could be that she doesn't have any support. It could be she's not sleeping, because who sleeps when there's a newborn, right? She doesn't have other hands to help her out and give her a hand. There could be many reasons, but the majority of the time, there is also an underlying biological hormonal issue. Why am I really pressing this point? Because it is so often that instead we say, you need to have better iman. You need to pray better. Make dua, it goes away. And I hope that we can, as a community, come to a point which Islam tells us, that what we say and what we do need to match what we learned from our blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His tradition was not one that ignored science, nor one that ignored medicine, nor one that ignored spirituality. His sunnah, his tradition, is one that integrated all of them. And we have these beautiful proofs, such as the example of his wife, Sayyidah Aisha, who is known to have given those who felt depressed, including for postpartum depression in her community, the community of Medina, something called talbina. Talbina was a dish made of barley, milk, honey. And those components are definitely a blessed components. But what always gets me is the fact when they asked Sayyidah Aisha, why are you giving this meal or this dish to people who are not feeling well? Who taught you this? She said, I learned it from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He taught me to do this. And it really, as a psychiatrist now in this field, I sit back and I reflect on how it could have been that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told Sayyidah Aisha, if you find somebody who's depressed or sad, tell them to pray. Here's a dua they should read. But that's not what the hadith says. That's not what the narration says. We definitely have du'as of what you say when you're feeling down or anxious. Absolutely. In fact, it's part of the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that every morning, part of his adhkar al-sabahi wal-masa, the dhikr he would say in the morning and evening, one of the main adhkar that he would say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hazan. Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from sadness and grief. So we know there are du'as to be said, but look at what he instructed Sayyidah Aisha. He said, give them this thing to take. Meaning, you can have an emotional or a mental health condition And the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is yes, to pray on one hand and make dua, here's the du'as, but also to take what you need to get better. Yani, you can take something by mouth, orally, to help you with an emotional issue. This is powerful. And I want to really push this a little bit further and say, when people say, oh, I'll never take medication, oh, I will never, and I say, why? Are we better than the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? He had an entire tibb nabawi, an entire prophetic medicine that was gathered about him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then that's his lifetime. And then if you look at the generations after him, that he was inspired by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who took the Quran and the Hadith as their main sources of knowledge, but they did not exclude sources of knowledge that were science all around them. And that's why the Muslims excelled in science, and they excelled in medicine, and they excelled in mathematics, and they excelled in the humanities, because they said, look, al-hikmatu dalatul mu'min. Wisdom is the lost property of a believer. Wherever you find it, you should take it, because as a believer, you will do good with it. So they learned everything the Greeks had to teach, and they threw away what was not useful, and they kept what was, right? We never had an issue between science and religion. I say all of this to say, it upsets me when I find women, when I'm speaking to women, mothers, and they say, no. I have to be able to just pray this away. I have to be better, I have to be stronger, and I just need to have better iman. Or they'll say, it's because Allah's upset with me. That's why I'm feeling like this. And I say, hold on. We don't know the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't know what He intends. Is this a trial? Is this a punishment? Is this supposed to be a lesson? Or is this supposed to be something to purify you and bring you closer to Him? Only He knows. On our end and our responsibility is the clear mandate of Islam to take care of yourself fully, completely. And as women, we do this thing because by nature, Allah created us to be nurturers. We nurture everyone around us. We nurture young and old. We nurture all the generations. We nurture the children. We nurture those who are same level, like our age group. Maybe these are our spouses, our siblings, and we those older than us, our parents, our grandparents. We're nurturing, giving. And very little are we taking. And this is like, for those of you who still drive cars that have gasoline, I know the wave of the future, this will be abolished, but for those of you who still go to fill gas in your, gas station, you know that if you drive a car, it will run on empty. Even those who are driving the electric cars, if you don't plug it in, you can't drive it. And after a period of time of giving, you will end up running on empty. And this is the crux of the issue for maternal mental health. This is the core. Let me share with you something very important here. The research actually shows us that Muslim women, here I'm talking specifically to Muslim women. This is the research on Muslim women here in the United States. 47% of American Muslim women report significant levels of stress. Yet, just about the same amount, about 50%, report resistance to seeking out care and support. This doesn't sound very prophetic in following the sunnah, does it? This doesn't sound like a sunnah or a tradition in which we're taught, right? لِكُلِّ دَاءٍ دَوَاء. For every illness, there is a treatment. Nor does it sound like the other narration that says if Allah sent down an illness or sent down a condition, He's also sent a treatment or a cure. This is the Muslim tradition. If Allah sent you something, He's also sent to you the resources to help you through it. Sometimes the resources are other people. And I'm going to get to therapy in a moment because I have to talk about this. And sometimes the resources are supports. Sometimes it's something you read that helps you understand, oh, well, that's what's going on. Sometimes it's seeing a doctor. Sometimes it's talking to other women, other mothers even, joining other support groups and people who understand. Sometimes it's finding a mentor, a coach, a guide who can help along the way. And all of this is part of our tradition. Because you know what the barriers are? Let me tell you. The research shows, and some of this is research in my own lab at Stanford, about Muslim women. We've written some papers on this, and people find it very strange. They're like, you claim that Muslim women have a lot of power. And I say, they do. You know why they do? You know why we do? Is because we are often decision makers. We are often in a position where we raise the next generation. Mothers, of course, this is part and parcel of what they do. They raise the next generation. And often in doing so, they're imparting knowledge, morals, wisdoms onto that next generation. And wisdom and guidance is more than just words. It's also your learning by experience. It's your role modeling. Everything we do as mothers for these children of ours, so whether they be biological children or spiritual children, they are watching us. And they're learning more from our behaviors than from our words. And that's why, however you speak about mental health and however you think about mental health and act upon it or don't, the kids are picking that up. Everyone around you is picking that up. And that's powerful. That's powerful. This is why there is there's this well-known saying, right? That the mother, is the madrasa. She is literally the school, right? Because she raises and teaches the next generations. It's not to say or belittle anything the fathers do. No, don't get me wrong. But definitely there's something to be said about how much influence mothers potentially can have, especially in the generations going forward. At the same time, another barrier is this spiritual bypassing I'm talking about. It's too often. Sisters, brothers, too often, we're hearing people say, it's because you're not religious enough. It's because you don't pray enough. It's because you don't have enough iman. And frankly, it is so oversimplified. I'm not saying that there couldn't be an iman factor. Of course there can be. But it's so oversimplified and so unscientific to attribute everything solely to just spiritual and religious causes, which is why I gave all of the previous examples. Because if that's truly what the Prophet ﷺ believed, he would have given Sayyidah Aisha only du'as, ad'iyah, to teach people. He wouldn't have had all of these other ways, holistic ways of providing care for people, right? And then she became, subhanAllah, we know Sayyidah Aisha was one of the experts in medicine at that time, and people asked her, they said, Sayyidah Aisha, we understand why you're so good at religious knowledge, because fiqh, Islamic rulings, because you lived with the Prophet ﷺ. And we understand why you're really good at learning the lineage. You knew all the lineages of people because your father was Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, who was also an expert in this. But how are you such an expert on medicine? And she said, because when the Prophet ﷺ fell ill, all the tribes of Arabia would come and offer him different of their herbs and treatments and medications and all different things. And she said, I learned from all of those different aspects and compiled them. So, very important here. Now, another barrier, I was talking about barriers, another barrier, access to quality care. And this is something I know I'm very passionate about. I spent a lot of my time at Maristan, the nonprofit organization I helped co-found, trying to solve this exact issue, subhanAllah. And I want to tell you, there's a long tradition of Muslim women who have been working on this topic as well. I'm just honored to be one in the long lineage of women who have worked on making sure that there were healing centers for our communities. Some of you know that I'm working on a book on the topic of the Madistans, which are the Muslim hospitals. I like to call them the exact translation, which was healing centers, Dar al-Shifa, right? Literally a center of healing. Basically the Muslim centers of healing or hospitals of the Muslim civilization. And in these institutions, they were beautiful. Think of everything of Islamic architecture, how beautiful Islamic architecture is, and everything has a spiritual significance, which is actually the title of the book of one of my mentors, may Allah bless him, Dr. Mustafa al-Badawi, who has a new book called The Spiritual Significance of Islamic Architecture. Every dome, every arch, everything had purpose of healing and connecting you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Different discussion for a different day. But the gardens and the use of color and sound, making sure that we're healing from all of our senses. This is what the Madistans were. Now, why am I telling this to women? On my trip last summer, I was in Turkey, driving from one end of the country to the other, visiting all the historical Maristans that are still standing. And I was blown away. I'd been researching this with my team at the lab for many years, and nowhere did it show what we found in person, was that so many of these institutions of healing were founded or funded or both by Muslim women who participated in the waqf, the sponsoring of the Madistans, who made sure that they endowed any of their donations to something sadaqah jari, an ongoing charity for health and wellness. And you can see their touch in the architecture or in the services that were being offered, including the mental health services. That's another proof. You wouldn't end up with a civilization that had mental health as the first ever people to put mental health in their hospitals before the Muslims. We're the first to do this as early as the 7th century, 8th century. So think about that for a moment and realize that your tradition is one that brings everything together. Now, I want to get very practical. I want to give you some very practical advice because this is all background, right? Kind of leading up to what I want to say. And part of that practical advice is to remind us, sometimes as mothers, the specific story in the Quran, I know people are going to jump to, oh, must be Sittina Maryam. And of course, her story in the Quran, because she is in fact pregnant right in the surah, subhanAllah. And you can literally go through and trace all of her emotions and everything that is happening as she's having essentially a miraculous birth. There's another surah in the Quran and a prophet that is mentioned that reminds me about pregnancy quite a bit. And motherhood. And this is me. It may not exactly relate to it, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story of Sayyidina Yunus. Sayyidina Yunus, as you know, was very upset with his people, as he gave them da'wah, as he gave them the message of one God, and they were not showing any progress, despite how much he did. And then he was swallowed by the whale. And he felt, complete despair. Just think about the sea creature that he was in. Some people translate it as a whale. And being in complete darkness, complete despair, feeling like you're stuck, feeling like you can't get out. It must have been damp and dank and stinky maybe in there. And when a person is down and depressed, this is kind of how they feel. It's dark and damp and difficult to climb out of. You don't know how. You don't know up from down or down from up. It's all very dark. And you're very isolated. Sayyidina Yunus, we learn, while he was inside of the whale, he turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in prayer and in repentance. And he said words that is the verse in the Quran, which is also now used as a dua very often, and dhikr. And if you don't have it memorized, I really encourage you to. I'll say it together. I'll say it here, and I hope we can say it together. He starts with La ilaha illallah, right? Kind of confirming the oneness of Allah, the one we must depend on when we feel this way. And he says, La ilaha illa anta, subhanak. So now he gives him praise, glory. La ilaha illa anta, there's no God but you. Subhanaka, glory be to you. Inni kuntu min al-zalimin. I was one of the wrongdoers. And this verse is powerful because it teaches us a couple of things. You turn to Allah Azza wa Jal. You admit how much you need His assistance and help. You give Him praise, as we ought to, even when you're feeling down. And then you say to Allah, I take responsibility, right? Sayyidina stormed off from his people. He wasn't supposed to do that, right? And so I take responsibility for what I am responsible for. And it's as in to say, and Allah, you have the ability to take me out of this darkness and this difficulty that I'm in. What does the story illustrate? It shows us that even the people who were the closest to Allah, a prophet of God, this is very important, a prophet of God. We're just ordinary people, me and you. But here was a prophet of God who felt completely in despair in this isolated, dark, damp place. And in these moments of isolation and seclusion with Allah, was able to find the strength, the guidance, the solace to call out to Allah Azza wa Jal, to glorify Him, to take responsibility for what He's done, and then to say, Ya Allah, show me the way, give me the light, the guidance, help me get out of here. And that is what our faith does. Faith gives you light, it gives you guidance. And you know what else faith does? It gives you very practical steps of what to do, right? How do you get to the right place, the next places? So here come my practical steps. I want to leave you with these practical steps. Look, I want to tell you something. If a woman is well taken care of, if a mother is well taken care of, it's like you've taken care of the entire family. In fact, it's not just the family. It's like you took care of the entire community, not just the community. It's as though you took care of the entire society, subhanAllah, literally. Because as women, we do nurture everyone around us, whether they're related to us or not. So here's what I want us to do. Number one, step one. Step one, please fill your cup. Fill your cup. There is an Islamic saying, فاقد الشيء لا يعطي. فاقد الشيء لا يعطي. One who does not have something cannot give it. You can't give what you don't have. If your cup isn't full, you can't pour it out to somebody else. So if you're running on empty, what are you giving? Fumes? It doesn't work. So in reality, I tell, and very often when I tell women and people, by extension, all people, there should be self-care. It's as though they hear me say the word selfish. I'm not saying selfish, and it is not selfish to do self-care. We must do self-care because we are nurturers by nature. We give and give and give. But you have to stop. My teachers, many of whom were women, sheikhat, they were so keen on making sure that we give and we pay forward all the blessings Allah has given us, but they were so keen that we take. They would say 1-to-1 ratio. You're going to go give a halaqah, a class, you better be sitting in one that week. Right? You're going to go do X, Y, or Z, you better be doing the equivalent of that for yourself that week. You know, very, very, you're going to feed somebody a meal, make sure you've eaten yours. Right? So that's very much part of our sunnah. We have to practice what we preach, subhanAllah. Number two, and they're all connected to each other. Number two, find circles of women, mothers who are like-minded. For some of you, this will be local. You can find them literally in your location if you live in a city that has many Muslims and or mothers, by the way. There's a lot in common with mothers, regardless, subhanAllah, of their background. But certainly Muslim mothers will be similar, and even more so if they're like-minded to you. Locally or virtually. We live in a world we're interconnected. Look how many devices, subhanAllah, are connected today. We're all over the world globally. In the women's organization, the Rahma Foundation that I'm part of, we're connected in so many WhatsApp groups with literally thousands of women across the world. And it's all different time zones, all different backgrounds. But you know what connects us all? Love of Allah, love of His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and sisterhood. It is so important to find people who are like-minded, who are not going to judge you or shame you or guilt trip you. And if they find you doing this to yourself, they would say, sister, don't. This is not the way of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So important, so important. And sisters, if you have circles of friends and or company that you keep that is very negative and judgy in this way, it's time to pull away and start make dua that Allah help you find people who are more like-minded, even if it be virtually at first. Number 3, I mentioned this one before, but it's very practical. Teach by example. What our kids pick up from us as mothers in our behavior and our actions. So think about mental health for a minute. If we say to them, I need a little timeout, I need to pause, right? I need a little bit of a minute. Just like sometimes we tell our kids to take a pause, right? We need to tell ourselves, and they could see that mama needs a pause right now. She needs to reset, right? And so, what I do, my kids have learned this. And if you've heard me speak before, you've probably have heard me talk about the concept of the i'tikaf corner, right? I'tikaf meaning spiritual seclusion, which is a strong, confirmed sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Feel free to look that up in another one of my lectures. But subhanAllah, you're welcome to look it up with all the steps of a woman's i'tikaf, particularly a woman's i'tikaf at home. But I use it all the time to pause, to take a time out, to reassess the heaviness of everything around me, and sometimes just the daily chores that build up and make us tired. And my kids know, because you have to make your intention before you enter into your i'tikaf corner. So when I pause at the door of my room, they all know. They're like, oh, mama's going into i'tikaf. They know mama needs her space for just a few moments, and it's not that long. It's not that long. But I need to reset. I need to recharge my battery so that I can pick myself up again and deal with everybody around me in the world, subhanAllah, around us and everything happening at our sisters and brothers globally. It's the way I keep saying. The example of i'tikaf, when one of my shaykhat said to us, and the i'tikaf, al-i'tikaf darura. The i'tikaf in the modern day and age today is a necessity. And one of the teachers, she likened it to a pressure cooker. Our life is like a pressure cooker, especially as mothers, as women. So much to do all the time. And she said, like a pressure cooker, it will explode unless you make sure you turn on the safety valve. And she said the safety valve of the pressure cooker is i'tikaf. So for me, I need this. It's the only way I cope, subhanAllah. And in that, you reset and you do your dhikr and you do your salawat and you pray your prayers and you listen to a lecture like this, for example. It is so important, my dear sisters. Take pause. And the reason I was saying all this, because number 3 is teach by example. They see you do that and they attach the time out to something positive, not something negative. This is another discussion on parenting, but that way they understand it is a good thing to pause. It is a good thing to sit there and do some dhikr. It is a good thing to be in dua. It's a good thing to pause every so often. You'll find your kids starting to do the same. How you treat your mental health and well-being is exactly how they're going to treat theirs. You make a priority for it, they will too. And that way, I won't hear what I sometimes hear in the office today, in the therapy office. I hear grown adults say, that the reason they haven't come out for care and support is either because they felt judged or they felt people would think they weren't good enough Muslims, or, and this is very sad to me, that their parents, their own parents would say, right, what do you need this thing for? What we say and what we do about health and well-being affects everyone around us, not just ourselves. And the last thing I'm going to say, and as I close here, in terms of very, hopefully I pray, practical support and guidance, is I promised I would come to this, to seek out support and guidance, because in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, and ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. So I'll close with this and say, the people of knowledge for every specialty is different. You go to a mechanic when your car is broken. You call a plumber when your sink is backed up. And you go to a mental health professional when your mental health isn't doing well. And maybe friends and family can support you in the beginning and help you. But if it's getting too far, too deep, too much, this is where family and friends can't help unless they are trained. But even then, they shouldn't, because ethically, it should be somebody other than friends and family who help out. And this is where the encouragement and lack of judgment is very important. And very important to actually not have this stigma or feeling like I am not a good Muslim if I somehow seek out support other than my dua and my prayers. I close again reminding us the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is to make dua, pray, and take whatever medications, whatever help, whatever support we need. Inshallah ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and me, give us help and assistance in raising these children of ours in our stage of motherhood, right, that we're in, these stages, subhanAllah, that we're in our life, and allow us to be from those who support and help one another and never be a reason why we are a barrier to someone else, including the parent who's a barrier to their children from getting help and support. Barakallahu feekum, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.